to the Nigerian president, Muhammadu Buhari, who yesterday signed a new executive order number 11 on the maintenance of national public buildings. The order gives legal backing to the country's national maintenance policy as the government looks to give facelift to nearly 24 of its assets across the country. For Nigeria, littered with public assets that are grossly maintained or left to rot for years and even decades in cases, is this a window into a new horizon of good asset infrastructure management? Joining me to answer some questions on this and a few others is Professor Ken Ife. He's a development economist and he's joining me this evening from Abuja studios. Good evening to you, Professor. Thank you very much for making it tonight. Let me just ask you straight what you make of this, this executive order number 11.
Well, I think it's a good one because one major weakness in our economy is just that we don't have that maintenance culture. And it is even worse when it comes to public buildings. And so this presidential order 11, which I believe will not be challenged like the presidential order 10 that was taken out by the Supreme Court, is there to address the issue of maintaining buildings, and then jobs are likely to be created with that, and MSMEs are likely to benefit from that approach. But I don't know what we are going to do to buildings that are not occupied. And then I don't know how the staffing could be, because there are some servants that are not doing anything. Whether they're going to be deployed, redeployed, I don't know, but that's a possibility.
Do you consider this order as the silver bullet for Nigeria's culture of poor maintenance of public infrastructure? Was it lack of money, by the way, or just because we just want to build and just abandon it? Look at the Federal Secretariat. The former Federal Secretariat in Lagos has been abandoned now for years. The National Theatre, the Central Bank, and the Bankers Committee are just trying to put that in order. So you have dozens and dozens of these, both at the federal level and at state level across the country.
Well, I wouldn't call it a silver bullet. I would say that it is a step in the right direction. But if a building is not occupied and you are spending money maintaining it, it's a whole new challenge. I think what we should do is to value what we have and then seek to sweat those assets by issuing instead of issuing debt instruments, we can issue equity instruments based on these properties. And that brings in investors in to put them into use. That's probably a better way to proceed in terms of buildings that are not occupied. But obviously, those that are occupied, it makes a lot of sense for you to make sure that if you go to Federal Secretariat in Abuja, you see some measure of non-maintenance. And that's the same across the whole states where the federal government has estates and public buildings. So yes, if they are occupied, it makes a lot of sense to use both local labor and some redundant workforce to invest in maintaining those buildings and improving their quality and reducing the decay. But for those that are not out of use, we have to do better things with those.
But the point I was trying to make with my earlier question, Prof, was, do we really need a presidential order, executive order, to do maintenance of public assets? Isn't that just what is already as part of what we should do?
Well, I know. No, it is. If it works, then it makes sense because we have enough laws and enough procedure. But the thing is that the presidential order seems to be working. In many times when they've been used in ease of doing business, in local procurement, for even at the science and technology order 5 and order 2, order 3, they seem to be working. So you just use what makes you think. Otherwise, we have enough laws. It's like getting a presidential order to deal with what is going on in the oil industry there, a lot of theft and all of that. We have enough laws to deal with those, but if presidential order will make a difference, then so be it. We'll use those.
Do you think this Executive Order 11 will be what you call an enabler for the incoming infraco that has been the multi-trillion naira infraco being planned by the central bank and the private sector?
I'm not really sure, because the infraco is going for new projects, very major strategic projects, not for things like maintenance of buildings. They have roads, they have aviation, they have airports, they have bridges, they have so many huge infrastructure holding the country back and denying us the diversification that we need across various sectors. I think they have their job cut out for them in those respects, because that's where you are bringing in private sector, trying to take over the 26 or more heavy projects across the country the federal government is currently handling. I mean, the types, you know the big projects like Lagos Ibadan Expressway, you have a bridge, Niger Bridge, you have so many major projects. That's why we're looking at getting the infrastructure company to not to go to government building. We have a lot to do with those kind of intervention. I don't think is the maintenance of public buildings that will be the main focus of the infrastructure company.
Oh, you mentioned a little bit earlier in your conversation about if we need an executive order with oil theft and sabotage and all of that. Let's tie that into this conversation. The wanton theft of Nigeria's crude oil and sabotage of assets in that sector in the Niger Delta and other areas of the country. Stand by, Professor Ken Ife from Abuja. We'll be back with you. Stand by, everyone, after this break. Welcome back to Arise Exchange. It's no longer news that oil thefts in Nigeria have gone beyond a crisis point and has become a deterrent against investments in the country's onshore oil industry. And that much was contained in a new report recently released by a think tank body called Wood Mackenzie. And that was confirmed also by the head of the State Oil Corporation, Mele Kyari. I'm asking a few questions around this with my guest on the show, Professor Ken Ife, live from Abuja studios. Professor, thank you so much. We'll talk about this. Let us chat about oil theft and sabotage. Do you think enough is being done to arrest this worsening situation?
I don't think so, because this is proceeding at a monumental stage. And something pretty urgent should be done about this. If we want to put presidential order on this, yes, but let's target the main culprits. I don't agree that artisanal refiners should continue to pollute the whole. I think we should have regulation, and I think we should have a developmental approach and see how we'll get them on or something. But the big elephant in the room is the size and complexity of this oil theft. I mean, it baffles me that you could have all these ships leaving the shores carrying our crude that is not being accounted for. So I think we need to have an urgent intervention, and presidential order has been working. So let's try that. One thing that the presidential orders do is that they bring a sense of urgency on the problem, and then they release resources to address that program and rallies stakeholders into action. So I think that should be something that the administration can try.
Now, we've tried quite a number of things. Now, this situation is now said to be beyond a crisis point and now an investment threat, and a threat to investments in Nigeria's oil and gas or hydrocarbon industry. We're doing according to Mele Kyari, the managing director of the NNPC, we're now doing about 1.5 from our 1.8, which is part of like our quota from OPEC plus. So it looks like we're getting down on our knees as it now. The thieves and the saboteurs of oil infrastructure are bringing us to our knees, as it were, as a country. So you say we need an executive order. Fine. So what should it be? Is it about a process,
I think,
or what? Or the action, the military, the authorities, those who are in charge of it? What exactly is the missing link?
Well, I think it is a far more complex story. It is really a very complex story because there are so many culprits involved in this. And to begin to get an inroad into it, let's launch a presidential order then. And then see how you mobilize people, bring that sense of urgency, because the whole onshore is collapsing. People are all moving away, going offshore. The big companies involved, I think virtually most of them have left, actually, leaving the Nigerian players to deal with the onshore onshore palaver. I think is gone past any stage.
But the Nigerian investors are also complaining, Professor. We've heard over the last a few weeks, Seplat Nigeria, the founding managing director, complained publicly on social media. Tony Elumelu, who is also the chairman of one of the oil firms, are also complaining about this. So the noose is around our neck, as it were. And even Nigerian investors who've put billions of dollars in there are now complaining. So is there anything we can harvest here as a new process of doing things? Who should be given the marching orders via an executive order?
The president, incidentally, is the minister for petroleum. So who else would give orders? Is the minister for petroleum is the president of the country. That's number one. But can you look at the monumental cost of Dangote having to do submarine piping of his products to Lekki? Underground waters. Can you imagine the cost? Simply because he couldn't risk surface pipeline to Lekki. It just delays his recovery of his investment. So I think we can handle this with kids' glove. It has led to investment meltdown in that region. And apart from the other crisis that it causes, each time you destroy, each time you break a pipeline, look at what it costs you to repair it. And then not to talk of when the thing is officially actually going out into the barges and tankers, and you have no way of accounting for those. And then also you have reports from NATI. They have been putting reports out on what has been going on. And we haven't had that stomach to deal decisively with this issue. It's just investment that it is melting away from the country.
In your opinion, Professor, would you want to see some form of action from Mr. President? Because, as you said, we all know he's effectively the Minister for Petroleum Resources. So if he's giving an executive order, that's coming from the man himself sitting on that chair. In terms of how to deal with sabotage for infrastructure, it looks like every time is getting a whole lot worse. This is 2022.
That's right. Coming from him, both as the president and as the minister for petroleum, carries more weight when he uses presidential order, because you have no other place to run to, or we have no other place to hide. So that is for him saying, look, I have had enough of this. I think let's get everybody involved, all hands on deck, and do what needs to be done. So I think it's going to be most effective if he actually uses presidential order, because you can't hide under any other thing. Nobody can hide under any other thing.
Interesting. Thank you so much for your insights tonight, Professor Ken Ife. We'll see you next time, and do have a great evening.